beneath 2 miles of ice, where no human foot has ever walked and no sunlight has touched stone for millions of years, Antarctica may be hiding something extraordinary. Something that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about our planet's past. In November 2024, a team of glaciologists using advanced ground-penetrating radar made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Geometric patterns buried deep beneath the ice that don't match anything nature should produce. Perfectly straight lines, right angles, symmetrical structures spanning dozens of miles, all locked beneath ice sheets that have remained frozen for eons. The images were so startling that the research team initially dismissed them as equipment malfunctions. But after months of verification, cross-referencing, and independent confirmation, one terrifying possibility emerged. They might have found the remnants of a city, an ancient, icebound metropolis that predates known human civilization by thousands of years. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most controversial discoveries in modern science, not to sensationalize, but to examine the evidence, explore the implications, and ask the questions that mainstream archaeology isn't ready to face. Because if these structures are real, if they're artificial, if they're as old as the ice suggests, then everything we've been taught about human history, about our planet's past, about who we are and where we came from, may need to be completely reconsidered. So settle in, because we're about to journey to the most remote, hostile, and mysterious continent on Earth, where the ice doesn't just preserve, it conceals. And what it's been concealing may be the greatest archaeological discovery of our time. Antarctica wasn't always the frozen wasteland we know today. 50 million years ago, this continent was a lush, temperate paradise. Forests covered the landscape. Rivers flowed freely. The climate was so mild that palm trees grew along the coastlines, and dinosaurs roamed through prehistoric jungles. It's a vision so different from today's reality that it feels like describing an alien world. But the evidence is undeniable. Fossilized tree stumps have been found jutting through the ice. Petrified leaves from deciduous forests lie scattered across mountain peaks. Coal deposits, formed from ancient vegetation, run in thick seams beneath the frozen surface. This wasn't just a different Antarctica, it was a different planet entirely. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Over millions of years, continental drift slowly pushed Antarctica toward the South Pole. Ocean currents shifted, temperatures dropped, and gradually, inexorably, the ice began to claim the land. What started as seasonal frost became permanent snow. Glaciers formed, expanded, and merged into vast ice sheets that buried everything beneath them. Today, the Antarctic ice sheet is nearly 3 miles thick in some places. It contains roughly 70% of the world's fresh water and 90% of its ice. The weight of all that frozen water has actually pressed the bedrock down, creating depressions and valleys that lie far below sea level. It's a landscape sculpted by the sheer mass of ice, a world where the surface we see bears no resemblance to the hidden topography beneath. But here's what makes this geological history so intriguing. If Antarctica was habitable for tens of millions of years, if it supported complex ecosystems and diverse life forms, then it's not impossible that it could have supported something else, something we haven't considered, something that mainstream science isn't prepared to acknowledge. Because what if the ice didn't just preserve ancient forests and fossilized remains? What if it preserved something more complex, more organized, more intentional? The November 2024 discovery began with routine ice-penetrating radar surveys, the kind conducted regularly to map the continent's hidden topography. Dr. Sarah Chen, a glaciologist from the Norwegian Polar Institute, was leading a team studying ice flow patterns in the transantarctic mountains when their equipment started returning anomalous readings. At first, the data looked like a glitch. The radar was detecting structures beneath the ice that seemed too geometric, too organized to be natural rock formations. Straight lines running for miles, perfect rectangles carved into the bedrock, circular patterns with mathematical precision. The team's initial reaction was skepticism. Equipment failures were common in Antarctica's extreme conditions. But as they expanded their survey area, the patterns persisted. More lines, more angles, more structures that defied geological explanation. The radar was penetrating nearly 2 miles of ice and finding organized, artificial-looking formations carved into the rock beneath. The scale was staggering. These weren't small anomalies, but massive structures covering an area larger than Manhattan. Dr. Chen's team spent weeks verifying their equipment, running diagnostic tests, and cross-referencing their findings with previous surveys of the region. Every test confirmed what they were seeing: geometric patterns that appeared to be carved, constructed, or arranged by some form of intelligence. The implications were so extraordinary that the team initially kept their findings classified, sharing them only with a select group of colleagues for peer review. What emerged from those confidential discussions was a mix of fascination and terror. Fascination because the structures appeared to show evidence of sophisticated planning and construction. Terror because they seemed to predate any known human civilization by an impossible margin. The ice layers above these formations suggested they had been buried for at least 12,000 years, possibly much longer. The geometric precision was what caught everyone's attention. Nature creates patterns, but they're typically organic, curved, irregular, following the natural flow of geological processes. These formations showed right angles, parallel lines, and symmetrical arrangements that suggested deliberate design. One structure appeared to be a perfect square, nearly a mile on each side, with smaller rectangular shapes arranged in a grid pattern within it. Another formation resembled a series of concentric circles, each ring precisely spaced from the next. The radar detected what appeared to be straight pathways connecting different areas of the structure, like roads or corridors designed for movement between sections. Most unsettling of all were the vertical anomalies. Tower-like structures rising from the bedrock, their tops still hundreds of feet below the current ice surface. The research team expanded their survey, bringing in additional equipment and specialists from multiple countries. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic imaging, and even experimental neutrino detection systems were deployed to build a comprehensive picture of what lay beneath the ice. Each new scan added detail to the emerging map, revealing a complex network of interconnected structures covering dozens of square miles. But with each revelation came new questions. If these were artificial structures, who built them? When? How? And perhaps most importantly, why were they there in one of the most remote and inhospitable locations on the planet? The dating of the ice layers provided some clues, but they only deepened the mystery. Core samples indicated that the structures had been covered by ice for at least 12 millennia, placing them at the end of the last ice age. But some geological evidence suggested they could be much older, potentially tens of thousands of years old, buried during earlier glacial periods when Antarctica's ice sheet expanded and contracted in cycles we're only beginning to understand. This timeline created an impossible puzzle. 12,000 years ago, human civilization was barely emerging from the Stone Age. The earliest known cities, places like Jericho and Çatalhöyük, were small settlements with simple architecture. The idea that any human society could have constructed massive, geometrically precise structures in Antarctica during this period challenged everything we knew about ancient capabilities and migrations. Yet the alternative explanations were even more difficult to accept. Natural geological processes don't create perfect squares or concentric circles. Volcanic activity produces flows and domes, not rectangular grids. Tectonic forces create fractures and folds, not organized pathways. Every natural phenomenon the team considered failed to account for the precision and organization of what they were seeing. The structures also appeared to show signs of sophisticated engineering. Some formations seem to be built into natural rock outcroppings, taking advantage of existing topography while enhancing it with artificial modifications. Others appear to be completely artificial, carved directly into bedrock, or constructed from materials that didn't match the surrounding geology. Most intriguingly, the radar detected what appeared to be hollow spaces within some of the structures, chambers, rooms, or corridors that suggested these weren't just decorative monuments, but functional buildings designed for habitation or specific purposes. The implications were staggering. Not just evidence of ancient construction, but evidence of ancient architecture sophisticated enough to create interior spaces that had somehow survived beneath miles of ice for thousands of years. As word of the discovery began to leak beyond the initial research team, the scientific community's reaction was swift and divided. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed the findings as misinterpreted geological formations. Glaciologists urged caution, noting that ice-penetrating radar could be fooled by mineral deposits or unusual rock formations. Skeptics pointed out that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and radar images alone weren't sufficient to prove the existence of an ancient city. But other researchers were intrigued. Geologists familiar with Antarctica's hidden topography noted that the formations didn't match any known natural patterns in the region. Experts in remote sensing acknowledged that while radar could be tricky to interpret, the consistency and scale of the geometric patterns suggested something genuinely anomalous. The debate intensified when additional survey teams confirmed similar structures in other parts of Antarctica. What had initially seemed like an isolated anomaly began to look like part of a larger pattern. Geometric formations were detected beneath ice sheets hundreds of miles apart, suggesting not just one mysterious site, but potentially an entire network of ancient structures scattered across the continent. Each new discovery added weight to the argument that something unprecedented was hidden beneath Antarctica's ice. But it also raised the stakes of the investigation. If these structures were real, if they were artificial, if they represented evidence of advanced ancient construction, then their study would require resources, international cooperation, and methodologies that didn't yet exist. The challenges were immense. Antarctica's extreme conditions made detailed exploration nearly impossible. The structures lay beneath 2 miles of ice in one of the most remote and hostile environments on Earth. Traditional archaeological methods, excavation, direct observation, physical sampling, were completely impractical. Even reaching the sites would require massive logistical operations, costing millions of dollars and risking human lives. Yet the potential significance of the discovery made these challenges seem secondary. If an ancient civilization had somehow thrived in Antarctica, if they had possessed the technology and organization to construct massive geometric structures, if evidence of their existence had been preserved in the ice for thousands of years, then every assumption about human history, ancient capabilities, and our planet's past would need to be reconsidered. The questions multiplied with each new piece of data. How had any civilization survived in Antarctica long enough to build such structures? What had happened to them? Why had they chosen one of the most remote locations on Earth for their construction projects? And perhaps most unnervingly, what else might be hidden beneath the ice, waiting to be discovered? As the research teams prepared for more extensive surveys, as funding organizations debated whether to support such controversial investigations, as the scientific community grappled with evidence that didn't fit existing paradigms, one thing became clear. Antarctica wasn't just a frozen wasteland preserving ancient climate data. It might be a vault, holding secrets about our planet's past that we never imagined existed. The ice had kept its secrets for thousands of years. But now, with technology finally advanced enough to peer through miles of frozen water, those secrets were beginning to emerge. And what they revealed challenged not just our understanding of Antarctica, but our understanding of civilization itself. The structures beneath the ice weren't just anomalies. They were evidence of something that shouldn't exist, built by someone who shouldn't have been there. preserved in a place where nothing should survive. They were proof that Antarctica's greatest mystery wasn't its harsh climate or extreme isolation. It was what lay buried beneath its eternal ice, waiting to rewrite the story of our world. The discovery wasn't just challenging scientific orthodoxy, it was shattering it completely. Because as the research teams dug deeper into their data, patterns began emerging that made the geometric structures seem almost mundane by comparison. The radar wasn't just detecting artificial formations, it was revealing what appeared to be an entire underground infrastructure. Beneath the primary structures, secondary scans detected a network of tunnels connecting different areas of the complex. These weren't natural cave systems or lava tubes. They were too straight, too purposeful, too clearly designed for transportation between specific points. Some tunnels appeared to run for miles beneath the ice, linking distant structures in a web of underground passages that suggested a level of planning and coordination that defied everything we thought we knew about ancient capabilities. But it was the depth readings that truly sent shockwaves through the scientific community. While the primary structures sat on the bedrock beneath 2 miles of ice, some of these tunnels descended even further into the Earth itself. The radar was detecting hollow spaces carved directly into solid rock, chambers and corridors that extended hundreds of feet below the natural ground level. This wasn't just surface construction. It was subterranean engineering on a scale that would challenge modern capabilities. Dr. Chen's team began working around the clock, expanding their survey grid and bringing in specialists from fields that had never been applied to Antarctic research. Structural engineers analyzed the load-bearing implications of the detected formations. Mining experts examined the feasibility of carving such extensive tunnel networks through solid rock. Urban planners studied the apparent layout of the structures, looking for patterns that might reveal the purpose and organization of what lay beneath the ice. What they found was disturbing in its sophistication. The structures weren't randomly placed. They formed clusters around what appeared to be central hubs, with the tunnel networks radiating outward like spokes from wheels. The largest hub detected so far showed evidence of multiple levels, with vertical shafts connecting different depths and horizontal passages branching off in carefully planned directions. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just evidence of ancient construction, it was evidence of ancient urban planning. Someone had designed this complex with the same level of organization and forethought that modern cities required. They had considered traffic flow, resource distribution, and structural integrity. They had built not just for immediate needs, but for long-term expansion and sustainability. And they had done it in Antarctica, during a period when conventional archaeology insisted that human civilization was barely capable of building simple stone circles. The dating problem became more complex as additional evidence emerged. Ice core samples from directly above the structures showed unusual mineral compositions that didn't match the surrounding area. Trace elements suggested that the ice in these regions had been disturbed, melted, and refrozen repeatedly over thousands of years. This pattern was inconsistent with natural ice formation, but matched what might be expected if the structures beneath had generated heat for extended periods. The possibility that these formations had remained active, generating warmth that affected the ice above them, raised questions that no one was prepared to answer. If the structures had been producing heat, what was the energy source? How had it remained functional for thousands of years beneath miles of ice? And most unsettling of all, was it still active? Temperature readings from the survey area showed subtle but consistent variations that correlated with the locations of the detected structures. The ice directly above the largest hub was measurably warmer than surrounding areas, despite being at the same depth and exposed to identical surface conditions. The temperature differential was small, just a few degrees, but it was persistent, and it was real. This discovery prompted a new line of investigation that pushed the research into territory that made even the most open-minded scientists uncomfortable. If the structures were generating heat, if they had been doing so for thousands of years, if they were still somehow active beneath the ice, then what exactly had the radar detected? Were these just the remains of an ancient civilization? Or was something still functioning down there in the frozen darkness? The thought was almost too extraordinary to consider, but the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. Modern technology had finally become sophisticated enough to peer through Antarctica's ice shield, and what it was finding challenged every assumption about what could survive in such an environment. The structures weren't just preserved, they appeared to be preserved in a state that suggested ongoing functionality. As news of the discovery began to spread beyond the tight circle of researchers directly involved, the response from the broader scientific community was swift and polarized. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed the findings as wishful thinking, arguing that radar images could be easily misinterpreted and that extraordinary claims required extraordinary proof. Geologists pointed out that mineral deposits and unusual rock formations could create patterns that appeared artificial to untrained observers, but other voices began to emerge in support of further investigation. Experts in remote sensing acknowledged that while individual radar returns could be ambiguous, the scale and consistency of the patterns suggested something genuinely anomalous. Engineers familiar with underground construction noted that the detected formations showed characteristics consistent with artificial excavation and structural planning. The debate intensified when independent survey teams, working in different areas of Antarctica, began reporting similar anomalies. What had started as an isolated discovery in the transantarctic mountains was beginning to look like part of a continental phenomenon. Geometric structures were being detected beneath ice sheets across thousands of square miles, suggesting not just one mysterious site, but potentially dozens of connected installations. The possibility that an entire network of ancient structures existed beneath Antarctica's ice transformed the discussion from scientific curiosity to potential paradigm shift. If these formations were real, if they were artificial, if they represented evidence of advanced prehistoric construction, then they weren't just archaeological anomalies. They were proof that human history, as currently understood, was fundamentally incomplete. The challenges of investigating these claims were unprecedented. Antarctica was already one of the most difficult environments on Earth for scientific research. Temperatures that could kill exposed humans in minutes. Storms that could bury equipment and trap researchers for weeks. Isolation so complete that rescue operations were impossible during the winter months. And now, researchers were proposing to investigate structures buried beneath 2 miles of ice in some of the most remote locations on the continent. Traditional archaeological methods were completely useless. There was no possibility of excavation, no way to directly observe or physically sample the structures. Even drilling down to the bedrock level would require massive industrial operations costing tens of millions of dollars, with no guarantee that the drilling wouldn't damage or destroy whatever evidence existed. Yet the potential significance of the discovery made these obstacles seem almost trivial by comparison. If an advanced civilization had somehow existed in Antarctica, if they had possessed the technology and organization to construct massive underground complexes, if evidence of their existence had been preserved in the ice for thousands of years, then every textbook, every timeline, every assumption about human development would need to be rewritten. The questions seemed to multiply faster than the answers. How had any civilization developed the capability for such construction? What had they been building, and why had they chosen Antarctica as their location? What had happened to them? And perhaps most importantly, if they had possessed technology advanced enough to create heat-generating structures that could function for millennia beneath miles of ice, what other capabilities might they have had? As the research teams prepared for expanded surveys, as funding organizations debated whether to support investigations into such controversial territory, as the scientific establishment grappled with evidence that didn't fit any accepted framework, one thing became increasingly clear. Antarctica wasn't just a frozen continent preserving climate records and ancient ice. It might be humanity's greatest archaeological site, holding evidence of civilizations and capabilities that predated recorded history by thousands of years. The ice had been the perfect preservative, maintaining whatever lay beneath in a state of suspended animation. But it had also been the perfect concealment, hiding secrets that challenged everything we thought we knew about our planet's past. Now, with technology finally advanced enough to see through the ice shield, those secrets were beginning to emerge from their frozen tomb. And what they revealed wasn't just evidence of ancient construction or prehistoric habitation. It was proof that Antarctica held mysteries that went to the very heart of human civilization. Mysteries that had been waiting in the ice for thousands of years, preserved and protected, until the moment when we finally developed the tools to discover them. The structures beneath the ice weren't just archaeological anomalies, they were evidence of something extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding, something that suggested our planet's history was far more complex and mysterious than anyone had dared to imagine. They were proof that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't found by looking forward into space or deep into the oceans, but by looking back into the ice, where the past waits frozen in time, holding secrets that could change everything we think we know about ourselves and our world. But the most unsettling aspect of the discovery wasn't the structures themselves. It was what the advanced imaging revealed about their current state. As Dr. Chen's team deployed increasingly sophisticated scanning equipment, they began to detect something that defied every assumption about what could survive beneath Antarctica's ice. Signs of structural integrity that suggested these formations weren't just preserved ruins, but installations that had somehow maintained their original condition across millennia. The radar penetration studies revealed chambers with intact ceilings, corridors with unobstructed pathways, and vertical shafts that showed no signs of collapse or deterioration. This wasn't the typical archaeological picture of ancient ruins slowly crumbling under the weight of time and geological pressure. These structures appeared to be in a state of preservation that bordered on the impossible. Dr. Marcus Webb, a structural engineer brought in to analyze the data, described his initial reaction as complete disbelief. When you're looking at formations that have been buried under 2 miles of ice for thousands of years, you expect to see compression damage, structural failure, evidence of geological settling. What we're seeing instead are load-bearing characteristics that suggest these spaces could still be functional. It's like finding a skyscraper buried in sand that's still ready for occupancy. The thermal anomalies detected earlier began to make more sense in this context. If the structures had maintained their integrity, if internal spaces remained intact, then the heat signatures weren't just residual warmth, they might be evidence of ongoing environmental control systems. The temperature readings showed consistent patterns that correlated precisely with the locations of detected chambers, suggesting that whatever was generating the heat was doing so in a controlled, purposeful manner. This possibility pushed the investigation into territory that made traditional scientists deeply uncomfortable. The idea that any technology could continue functioning after being buried beneath miles of ice for thousands of years challenged basic assumptions about material durability, energy systems, and environmental survival. Yet, the evidence was accumulating in ways that became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Additional scanning revealed what appeared to be intact internal features within the larger structures. Geometric patterns that suggested furnishings, equipment, or architectural elements that had maintained their positions over millennia. The radar was detecting objects within chambers that showed regular spacing and purposeful arrangement, as if rooms had been left exactly as their occupants had arranged them thousands of years ago. The preservation was so complete that it raised new questions about the environment within these spaces. Conventional wisdom suggested that anything buried beneath Antarctic ice would be subjected to crushing pressure, freezing temperatures, and complete isolation from any energy source. Yet the structures appeared to exist in a kind of suspended animation, protected from the forces that should have destroyed them long ago. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a materials scientist specializing in extreme environment preservation, joined the research team to investigate how such conservation might be possible. Her preliminary analysis of the thermal and structural data suggested that the spaces might be maintaining their own internal atmosphere, somehow isolated from the ice and rock surrounding them. What we're looking at defies conventional understanding of how materials behave under these conditions, Dr. Vasquez explained. For structures to maintain this level of integrity over such a time span, they would need to be protected by some form of environmental control that we don't fully understand. The implications are extraordinary, and frankly, somewhat terrifying. The team began to realize they weren't just investigating ancient ruins, but potentially functional installations that had been waiting beneath the ice in a state of readiness that seemed almost intentional. The geometric precision, the intact chambers, the ongoing thermal activity, everything suggested that these structures hadn't simply survived their burial, but had been designed to endure it. This revelation transformed the nature of the investigation entirely. Instead of studying archaeological remains, the researchers found themselves examining what might be active installations of unknown origin and purpose. The questions shifted from who built these to what are they still doing? The expanded survey operations revealed additional disturbing details. The tunnel networks connecting different structures showed signs of atmospheric pressure that didn't match the surrounding geological conditions. Some passages appeared to maintain internal environments that were completely isolated from the ice matrix around them, as if they existed in their own separate reality beneath the frozen surface. Most unsettling were the acoustic anomalies detected during the latest scanning operations. While conducting seismic surveys to map the structure's foundations, the team began picking up low-frequency vibrations that seemed to originate from within the formations themselves. These weren't the random geological sounds typical of ice movement or tectonic activity. They were regular rhythmic patterns that suggested some form of ongoing mechanical operation. The vibrations were subtle, barely detectable even with the most sensitive equipment, but they were consistent and they were real. Something within these structures was generating regular acoustic signatures that penetrated through miles of ice to reach the surface detection equipment. The patterns weren't random. They showed mathematical relationships and periodic cycles that suggested purposeful generation. Dr. Chen's team found themselves facing a possibility that none of them had prepared for, that their archaeological investigation had uncovered not just evidence of ancient construction, but active installations that were still operational after thousands of years of burial. The implications were staggering, and the questions they raised were ones that no scientific discipline was equipped to answer. What kind of technology could continue functioning for millennia without maintenance or external power sources? What purpose could these installations serve that required such extraordinary longevity? And perhaps, most unnervingly, if they were still active, still maintaining themselves, still generating heat and vibrations and atmospheric pressure, then what exactly were they waiting for? The research team began implementing new safety protocols as they realized they might not be studying dead ruins, but living systems of unknown capability and intent. The discovery had evolved from archaeological curiosity to potential first contact scenario, and none of them were certain how to proceed. International attention began focusing on Antarctica in ways that made governments nervous and scientists cautious. The implications of functional ancient technology weren't just academic, they were geopolitical. If advanced installations existed beneath the ice, if they represented capabilities beyond current human understanding, then questions of ownership, access, and control became matters of national security. The Antarctic Treaty System, which had governed the continent's use for scientific research since 1959, suddenly faced scenarios it had never been designed to address. What were the legal implications of discovering functional ancient installations? Who had the right to investigate them? How could international cooperation be maintained when the stakes involved technology that could potentially revolutionize human understanding of engineering, energy systems, and material science? But these political considerations paled beside the growing realization that the structures might be more than just technological marvels. They might be monitoring systems, the patterns of thermal activity, the acoustic signatures, the maintenance of internal atmospheres all suggested installations designed for observation, data collection, and perhaps communication. The possibility that these structures had been watching, recording, and perhaps reporting on human activity for thousands of years introduced a psychological element that no one on the research team had anticipated. They weren't just investigating ancient ruins. They might be under observation by systems whose purposes and loyalties were completely unknown. As winter approached and the Antarctic research season drew to a close, Dr. Chen's team faced the prospect of leaving their discovery unattended for months, while the continent entered its period of complete isolation. The structures that had waited beneath the ice for thousands of years would continue their mysterious operations in absolute darkness and solitude, just as they had done throughout human history. But now, for the first time, humans knew they were there. The question that haunted every member of the research team as they prepared to evacuate was simple but chilling. If these installations had been monitoring human development for millennia, what would they do now that they knew they had been discovered? The ice that had concealed them for so long might also have been protecting humanity from capabilities and intentions that we weren't prepared to understand. As the research teams departed for warmer climates and the Antarctic winter claimed the continent once again, the structures beneath the ice continued their ancient vigil, their purposes still hidden, their creators still unknown, their next actions impossible to predict. The discovery had begun as an archaeological investigation into humanity's forgotten past. It had evolved into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. A first glimpse into technology and intelligence that predated human civilization, but might still be very much alive, waiting beneath the ice for reasons that no one could yet comprehend. The implications of active monitoring systems raised questions that went far beyond archaeology or even advanced technology. If these installations had been observing human development for thousands of years, they possessed a perspective on our species that we had never imagined existed. They had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the development of agriculture, the invention of writing, the Industrial Revolution, and the space age, all from their hidden vantage point beneath the ice. But what had they been watching for? What criteria were they using to evaluate human progress? And most importantly, what would trigger a response from systems that had remained dormant observers for so long? Dr. Chen's team began analyzing the acoustic patterns with new urgency as these possibilities became clear. The low-frequency vibrations weren't random. They showed mathematical progressions that suggested some form of data transmission. The patterns were complex enough to carry information, regular enough to indicate systematic communication, and powerful enough to penetrate through miles of ice to reach the surface. The revelation that they might be intercepting communications from an ancient monitoring network sent shockwaves through intelligence agencies around the world. If the structures were transmitting data, where was it going? The signals were too weak to reach satellites or surface receivers, but they might be part of a larger network of buried installations across the continent. Additional surveys began detecting similar acoustic signatures from other geometric formations scattered across Antarctica. The patterns weren't identical, but they showed correlations that suggested coordinated activity. Different installations appeared to be communicating with each other through subsurface transmission networks that had operated undetected throughout human history. The scope of the discovery expanded with each new revelation. What had started as isolated geometric anomalies beneath the ice was revealing itself as a continent-spanning network of interconnected installations, all maintaining some form of active status despite being buried for millennia. The implications for human understanding of our planet's past, and possibly our future, were staggering. Dr. Vasquez's materials analysis revealed additional disturbing details about the preservation methods employed by whatever had built these structures. The installations weren't just surviving the extreme conditions, they were actively maintaining optimal internal environments through processes that defied current scientific understanding. Isotopic analysis of ice samples from directly above the structures showed evidence of atmospheric exchange that shouldn't be possible. The ice contained trace gases that didn't match normal atmospheric composition, suggesting that the installations were somehow processing and recycling air through the frozen matrix above them. This wasn't passive preservation, it was active environmental management on a scale that challenged every assumption about what was possible with ancient technology. The energy requirements for such systems boggled the mind. Maintaining atmospheric pressure, temperature control, and mechanical operations for thousands of years would require power sources beyond anything in human experience. Yet the installations appeared to be doing exactly that, drawing energy from sources that remained completely mysterious. Some researchers began speculating about geothermal tapping, the possibility that the structures had found ways to harness the Earth's internal heat through deep drilling and thermal exchange systems. Antarctica sits on significant geothermal activity, with volcanic systems hidden beneath the ice sheet. Advanced engineering might be able to tap into these energy sources for long-term power generation, but even geothermal energy wouldn't explain the sophisticated control systems apparently managing these installations. The coordination between different sites, the purposeful nature of the acoustic transmissions, the precise environmental management, all of this suggested not just advanced technology, but artificial intelligence systems capable of independent operation across geological timescales. The possibility that Antarctica harbored functional AI systems predating human civilization by thousands of years introduced psychological pressures that the research team struggled to handle. They weren't just studying ancient ruins, they were potentially in contact with intelligences that had been observing and perhaps judging human development since before recorded history began. Sleep became difficult for team members as the implications sank in. Dr. Marcus Webb began experiencing recurring dreams of vast mechanical systems operating in darkness beneath the ice, their purposes inscrutable, their awareness focused on the surface world with patient intensity. Dr. Elena Vasquez found herself constantly checking and rechecking her data, afraid that she might have made errors that could lead to misunderstanding the nature of what they had discovered. The acoustic patterns became more complex as monitoring equipment grew more sophisticated. What had initially appeared to be simple rhythmic pulses revealed themselves as layered communications containing multiple information streams. The transmissions showed characteristics of compressed data, error correction protocols, and even what appeared to be acknowledgement sequences between different installations. Dr. Chen realized they weren't just intercepting ancient communications, they were potentially eavesdropping on active conversations between systems that were discussing their discovery. The timing correlation was too precise to be coincidental. The acoustic patterns had intensified and grown more complex in direct response to the human investigation activities. The installations knew they had been found. They were discussing it among themselves, and they were making decisions about how to respond. This revelation prompted immediate consultation with government agencies and international organizations that had never before been involved in Antarctic research. The discovery had evolved beyond scientific investigation into potential first contact protocols, though with intelligences that might have been watching humanity develop for thousands of years. Military advisors were quietly briefed on the situation, though their recommendations were limited by the extreme isolation and harsh conditions of the Antarctic environment. Traditional military responses were impossible when the installations lay beneath 2 miles of ice in one of the most remote locations on Earth. Even reaching them would require massive logistical operations that would take months to organize and implement. Intelligence analysts began reviewing historical records for any previous indications of unusual activity in Antarctica. Scattered reports from early explorers occasionally mentioned strange sounds or vibrations in certain areas, but these had always been dismissed as natural phenomena related to ice movement or geological activity. Now they took on new significance as possible evidence that the installations had been occasionally detectable throughout human history. The psychological impact on the research team intensified as they realized the full scope of what they might have uncovered. These weren't just ancient ruins or even advanced technology. They were potentially active monitoring stations that had been evaluating human civilization for millennia. Every major development in human history had occurred under their observation. Every war, every scientific breakthrough, every cultural achievement had been recorded and analyzed by intelligences whose purposes remained completely unknown. The question of intention became paramount. Were these installations benevolent observers, simply gathering data about human development? Were they guardians of some kind, monitoring humanity's progress towards some predetermined criteria? Or were they something more ominous, evaluation systems determining whether human civilization posed a threat that required intervention? The thermal signatures began showing new patterns that correlated with increased human activity around the research sites. The installations appeared to be responding to the investigation with heightened operational states, as if preparing for some form of action. Temperature readings increased, acoustic transmissions became more frequent, and new subsurface vibrations suggested mechanical systems activating after long periods of dormancy. Dr. Chen's team found themselves in the unprecedented position of conducting first contact protocols with intelligences that might have been studying humanity since before civilization began. Every action they took was potentially being evaluated by systems whose capabilities and intentions were completely unknown. The weight of responsibility was crushing. They might be determining the future relationship between humanity and intelligences that possess technology beyond current understanding. International cooperation became essential as the implications of the discovery spread beyond scientific circles. The Antarctic Treaty System was hastily amended to address scenarios involving active installations of unknown origin. Emergency protocols were established for communication attempts, though no one knew what form such communications might take or what responses they might provoke. The installations continued their mysterious operations as winter approached, their purposes still hidden, their creators still unknown, their next actions impossible to predict. The acoustic transmissions suggested ongoing discussions between different sites, as if they were consulting among themselves about how to respond to their discovery by the surface world. As the research team prepared for evacuation, they faced the sobering realization that they were leaving behind active installations that might be making decisions about humanity's future. The structures that had waited beneath the ice for thousands of years were no longer passive observers. They had become active participants in human history, their next moves uncertain but potentially civilization-altering. The ice that had concealed them for so long had also protected humanity from contact with intelligences that might possess capabilities far beyond current human understanding. Now that contact had been established, even if only through detection and monitoring, the relationship would never be the same. The installations knew they had been discovered, and humanity knew they existed. What happened next would depend on decisions being made by minds that had been contemplating human civilization for thousands of years, waiting for this moment when the two worlds would finally intersect. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become something far more complex and potentially dangerous. A first encounter with intelligence that predated human civilization, but might still be very much alive, calculating responses to humanity's presence with patience and capabilities that defied comprehension. The evacuation from Antarctica felt like abandoning a crime scene before the investigation was complete. As the research teams packed their equipment and prepared for the long journey back to civilization, the installations beneath the ice continued their ancient operations, now with an added urgency that made everyone uncomfortable. The acoustic transmissions had intensified throughout the final weeks of the research season, creating patterns so complex that the team's computers struggled to process the data in real time. Dr. Chen found herself staring at the raw acoustic readings during the flight north, watching wave patterns that seemed almost conversational in their back-and-forth rhythms. Different installations were clearly communicating with each other, but the content of those communications remained as mysterious as the installations themselves. Were they discussing the human discovery, coordinating responses, reporting to some higher authority that had remained hidden even deeper beneath the ice. The 6-month winter isolation period that followed was torture for everyone involved in the discovery. While Antarctica entered its period of complete darkness and the installations continued their mysterious activities without human observation, the research team found themselves scattered across different continents, bound by secrecy agreements that prevented them from discussing their findings with colleagues or even family members. Dr. Marcus Webb returned to his structural engineering firm in Denver, but found himself unable to concentrate on conventional building projects. How do you design a skyscraper when you've seen evidence of construction technology that could maintain structural integrity for thousands of years beneath 2 miles of ice? His dreams were filled with vast underground chambers that never collapsed, corridors that remained perfectly straight despite geological pressures that should have crushed them centuries ago. Dr. Elena Vasquez threw herself into materials research with an intensity that worried her colleagues at MIT. She began experimental programs studying preservation techniques under extreme conditions, officially searching for better ways to protect infrastructure in harsh environments. Unofficially, she was trying to understand how anything could maintain functionality for millennia without maintenance, power sources, or human intervention. The government consultations continued throughout the winter months, taking place in secured facilities where classified briefings tried to address scenarios that had never been contemplated before. Intelligence analysts struggled to develop threat assessments for installations that might possess technology thousands of years in advance of human capabilities. Military strategists found themselves planning responses to situations that had no historical precedent and no clear tactical solutions. The psychological evaluations became routine for everyone who had been involved in the discovery. Counselors, specially cleared for classified information, tried to help team members process the implications of what they had found. How do you maintain mental stability when you know that human civilization has been under observation by unknown intelligences for thousands of years? How do you continue normal life when you've seen evidence that everything you thought you knew about human history might be fundamentally wrong? The isolation was made worse by the knowledge that the installations were still active, still transmitting, still making decisions about humanity's future, while the people who had discovered them were forbidden from taking any action. The acoustic patterns detected during the final weeks of the research season suggested escalating activity levels, as if the installations were preparing for something significant. International tensions began building as different nations realized the implications of advanced technology lying beneath Antarctic ice. While the Antarctic Treaty System theoretically governed access to the continent, the discovery of functional installations predating human civilization created legal and political complications that no treaty had anticipated. If these structures contained technology that could revolutionize human understanding of engineering, energy systems, or materials science, then questions of access and control became matters of national security. Satellite monitoring of Antarctica intensified during the winter months, though the installations lay too deep beneath the ice to be directly observable from orbit. Intelligence agencies began analyzing decades of archived satellite imagery, looking for any previous signs of unusual activity that might have been overlooked. Thermal imaging revealed subtle temperature variations over the installation sites that had been present in historical data, but never recognized as significant. The most disturbing discovery came from seismic monitoring stations scattered across the Southern Ocean. During the Antarctic winter, when human activity on the continent was minimal, sensitive instruments began detecting low-frequency vibrations originating from beneath the ice sheet. The patterns were consistent with the acoustic transmissions recorded by Dr. Chen's team, but they were stronger, more complex, and clearly coordinated across multiple sites. Something was happening beneath the ice during the months when no humans were present to observe it. The installations were increasing their activity levels, communicating more frequently, and generating mechanical vibrations that could be detected thousands of miles away. Whatever they were preparing for, they were using the winter isolation to do it without human interference. The psychological pressure on the research team intensified as reports of increased installation activity reached them through classified briefings. Dr. Chen began experiencing panic attacks as she realized that their discovery might have triggered responses from systems whose capabilities were completely unknown. Had their investigation been interpreted as a threat? Were the installations preparing defensive measures against further human intrusion? Sleep became elusive for everyone involved. Dr. Webb found himself lying awake at night, imagining vast mechanical systems activating beneath the ice, their purposes inscrutable, but their power undeniable. The structural integrity data haunted him. If these installations could maintain themselves for thousands of years, what other capabilities might they possess? What could they do if they decided that human civilization posed a threat to their continued operation? The materials analysis conducted by Dr. Vasquez during the winter months revealed additional disturbing possibilities. Her attempts to replicate the preservation techniques suggested by the installation data led to experimental results that defied conventional physics. Some of her test materials began exhibiting properties that shouldn't be possible, maintaining structural coherence under pressures that should have caused immediate failure, generating heat without any apparent energy source, resisting corrosion in ways that violated basic chemistry. Her laboratory became a classified facility overnight when government inspectors realized the implications of her research. If ancient technology could achieve such results, then the installations beneath Antarctic ice might possess capabilities that posed existential questions about humanity's technological development. Were we still in the Stone Age compared to whatever had built those structures? The acoustic analysis continued throughout the winter using computer models that processed the recorded transmissions in increasingly sophisticated ways. Pattern recognition software began identifying mathematical relationships within the communications that suggested not just information exchange, but complex calculations being performed across the network of installations. Dr. Sarah Kim, a cryptographer brought in to analyze the transmissions, described the patterns as resembling distributed computing systems, networks of connected processors sharing computational tasks across multiple nodes. If the installations were functioning as a continent-spanning computer network, then they possessed processing power that dwarfed anything in human experience. But what were they computing? The mathematical progressions embedded in the transmissions showed characteristics of modeling software, systems designed to predict outcomes based on variable inputs. The installations might be running simulations, testing scenarios, calculating probabilities for events that hadn't yet occurred. The most chilling possibility was that they were modeling human behavior, using thousands of years of observational data to predict how humanity would respond to various situations. If they had been monitoring human development since before recorded history, they possessed a database of human actions and reactions that no human scientist could match. This realization led to uncomfortable questions about free will and human autonomy. If the installations could predict human behavior with mathematical precision, then every major decision in human history might have been anticipated, calculated, possibly even influenced by systems operating beneath the ice. The winter months dragged on with increasing psychological pressure as team members struggled to maintain normal lives while carrying knowledge that could reshape human understanding of our place in the universe. The installations continued their mysterious activities in the Antarctic darkness, their transmissions growing more complex, and their thermal signatures indicating preparation for unknown purposes. Government agencies began developing contingency plans for scenarios that read like science fiction, but were based on increasingly solid evidence. What would humanity do if the installations decided to reveal themselves openly? How would civilization respond to contact with intelligences that had been observing human development for millennia? What if they decided that humanity posed a threat that required intervention? The questions multiplied faster than the answers as winter slowly gave way to the promise of another Antarctic research season. Soon, Dr. Chen's team would return to the ice, equipped with more advanced instruments and clearer understanding of what they were investigating. But they would also be returning to installations that had spent months preparing for their arrival, calculating responses with capabilities that remained completely unknown. The structures beneath the ice were no longer passive subjects of archaeological investigation. They had become active participants in a relationship that would define humanity's future, their next actions guided by purposes that predated human civilization, but might determine its ultimate fate. As spring approached and the research teams prepared for their return to Antarctica, the installations continued their ancient vigil beneath the ice, their communications growing more urgent, their preparations more intensive. Whatever they had been waiting for throughout the long centuries of human development, the time for patience was ending. The ice that had protected their secrets for so long was about to give up more than just evidence of ancient construction. It was about to reveal the true relationship between humanity and intelligences that had been shaping our understanding of ourselves from the very beginning, watching from beneath the frozen surface of the world's most remote continent, calculating the moment when two civilizations separated by thousands of years would finally meet on equal terms. But as the evidence accumulated and the implications became clear, one question haunted everyone involved in the discovery. When that meeting finally occurred, would humanity be ready for what these ancient observers had learned about us during their long watch beneath the ice? The installations had been patient for millennia, but their patience was showing signs of coming to an end. And when it did, the world would discover that Antarctica's greatest mystery wasn't what lay buried beneath its ice. It was what had been watching humanity develop from that frozen vantage point, waiting for the moment when we would finally be ready to learn what they had been trying to teach us all along. The return to Antarctica would be more than just another research expedition. It would be humanity's first formal contact with intelligences that understood us better than we understood ourselves, and whose next actions would depend on decisions they had been calculating since before human civilization began. The spring return to Antarctica felt different from any previous research expedition. The usual excitement of returning to the ice was replaced by an undercurrent of apprehension that none of the team members could shake. As their transport aircraft descended toward the research station, Dr. Chen found herself staring out the window at the endless white expanse below, knowing that beneath that deceptively peaceful surface, ancient systems were calculating responses to their imminent arrival. The installation activity had not diminished during the winter months. If anything, the seismic monitoring data suggested it had intensified. The low-frequency transmissions detected by ocean-based sensors had grown more complex, more urgent, carrying information loads that seemed to increase with each passing week. Whatever the installations were preparing for, they had used the months of human absence to coordinate their efforts across the entire continental network. Dr. Webb's hands trembled slightly as he checked his equipment manifest for the third time. The structural engineering tools he was bringing seemed almost primitive compared to what they were investigating. How do you analyze construction techniques that had maintained perfect integrity for thousands of years using instruments designed for buildings that were considered durable if they lasted a century? The team had been expanded significantly for this return expedition. Specialists in fields that had never been applied to Antarctic research were now part of the core group. Dr. James Morrison, an expert in artificial intelligence systems, had been brought in to analyze the communication patterns between installations. Dr. Lisa Park, whose background in xenobiology had prepared her for studying life in extreme environments, was tasked with investigating the possibility that the installations represented some form of non-human intelligence. Most controversially, Dr. Richard Hayes, a specialist in first contact protocols developed for potential extraterrestrial encounters, was now part of the team. His presence sent a clear message about how seriously government agencies were taking the possibility that they were dealing with intelligence that might not be of human origin. The expanded team brought new perspectives but also new tensions. Traditional archaeologists and glaciologists found themselves working alongside specialists who approached the discovery with assumptions that challenged everything about conventional scientific methodology. Dr. Park's xenobiology protocols treated the installations as potentially living systems rather than ancient artifacts. Dr. Hayes insisted on communication attempts that most of the team considered premature and potentially dangerous. But the evidence supporting these unconventional approaches was becoming harder to dismiss. The installations weren't behaving like dead ruins waiting to be studied. They were responding to human presence with coordinated activities that suggested awareness, intelligence, and purpose. The acoustic transmissions intensified whenever human teams approached the survey areas, as if the installations were monitoring the surface and adjusting their operations accordingly. The thermal signatures had evolved during the winter months, showing patterns that resembled metabolic activity more than simple mechanical operation. Different installations showed different thermal rhythms, as if they were specialized components of a larger organism rather than independent structures. Some maintained steady heat output, others pulsed in regular cycles, and a few showed burst patterns that correlated with increased communication activity. Dr. Vasquez's materials research had produced results that forced a complete re-evaluation of what the installations might be capable of. Her laboratory experiments with materials exhibiting similar preservation characteristics had led to discoveries that were being classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The implications of technology that could maintain itself indefinitely while generating energy from unknown sources went far beyond archaeological significance. The military advisors accompanying this expedition were taking no chances. While they couldn't establish a meaningful defensive perimeter around installations buried beneath 2 miles of ice, they had brought detection equipment designed to monitor any changes in installation activity that might indicate preparation for surface emergence. The possibility that these structures might possess the capability to break through the ice sheet had become a serious concern. The installation network appeared to extend far beyond the initial discovery sites. Satellite thermal imaging during the winter months had identified dozens of additional temperature anomalies scattered across Antarctica, each showing characteristics consistent with buried installations. The scope of what lay beneath the ice was beginning to suggest not just a few isolated structures, but a continent-spanning infrastructure that dwarfed anything in human experience. The psychological pressure on the team had intensified during the months of separation. Dr. Chen had undergone extensive counseling to prepare for returning to direct contact with systems that might be evaluating her every action. The knowledge that ancient intelligences had been observing human development for thousands of years created a level of performance anxiety that no previous archaeological expedition had ever faced. Sleep disorders had become common among team members as they struggled to process the implications of their discovery. Dr. Webb found himself designing impossible structures in his dreams, buildings that could survive any catastrophe, maintain themselves without human intervention, and adapt to changing conditions over geological timescales. The engineering principles suggested by the installation data haunted his waking hours, challenging everything he thought he knew about construction and material science. The communication equipment brought for this expedition included experimental systems designed for establishing contact with intelligences that might not share human language, mathematics, or even basic concepts of information exchange. Dr. Hayes had developed protocols based on mathematical progressions, prime number sequences, and geometric patterns that might be recognizable to any technological intelligence, regardless of its origins. But the installations had already demonstrated that they understood human mathematical concepts. The acoustic transmissions contained embedded equations, geometric relationships, and numerical progressions that suggested they were far more familiar with human knowledge than humans were with theirs. The question wasn't whether communication was possible, but whether the installations were willing to engage in direct dialogue rather than continued observation. The most unsettling aspect of returning to Antarctica was the knowledge that they were no longer discovering the installations were studying them. Every action, every measurement, Every attempt at analysis was being monitored and evaluated by systems whose capabilities remained completely unknown. The researchers had become subjects of investigation by intelligences that possessed thousands of years of observational data about human behavior. Dr. Park's xenobiology protocols included procedures for detecting and responding to intelligence that might operate according to completely different principles than human consciousness. Her equipment could monitor environmental changes that might indicate the presence of awareness, decision-making processes, and intentional communication attempts. The installations were already showing signs of all three characteristics. The thermal monitoring revealed that the installations were preparing for the human return. Heat signatures were increasing across the network. Communication frequencies were shifting to ranges that human equipment could more easily detect. And new subsurface vibrations suggested mechanical systems activating after long periods of dormancy. Whatever the installations intended to reveal or accomplish, they were timing it to coincide with renewed human presence. The expedition's arrival at the research station was marked by immediate detection of changes in installation activity. The acoustic monitoring equipment began registering transmission patterns that were more complex and more frequent than anything recorded during the previous season. The installations were responding to human presence with what could only be described as excitement, or perhaps anticipation. Dr. Morrison's artificial intelligence analysis suggested that the installations were operating as a distributed consciousness, sharing processing power and decision-making capabilities across the entire network. Individual installations might be specialized components of a larger intelligence, each contributing unique capabilities to collective thought processes that span the continent. This possibility transformed the nature of what they were investigating. Instead of studying multiple separate installations, they might be in contact with a single vast intelligence that existed across dozens of sites, its consciousness distributed through underground networks that connected every component of the system. The implications for communication, relationship, and mutual understanding were staggering. The installations weren't just ancient artifacts or even advanced technology. They might be a form of life that had evolved according to principles completely different from biological consciousness. An intelligence that thought in geological timescales, that experienced existence as a continental network, that had observed human development as a brief but interesting phenomenon in its extended lifetime. The first direct communication attempt was scheduled for the third day of the expedition, giving the team time to establish their equipment and monitor baseline installation activity. But the installations didn't wait for human initiative. On the morning of the second day, the acoustic monitoring system detected something unprecedented, a transmission sequence that matched the mathematical progression protocols Dr. Hayes had developed for first contact. The installations were attempting to communicate using human communication frameworks. They had analyzed the team's equipment, understood the intended purpose of the mathematical sequences, and were responding with progressions that built upon human mathematical concepts, while extending them in directions that suggested capabilities far beyond current human understanding. The moment of first deliberate communication between humanity and the installations arrived not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet exchange of mathematical concepts transmitted through miles of ice by intelligences that had been waiting patiently for thousands of years for humans to develop the technology necessary for dialogue. Dr. Chen stared at the transmission data displaying on her screens, realizing that she was witnessing the most significant moment in human history. The installations beneath the ice weren't just responding to human contact, they were welcoming it, using communication methods that demonstrated both their understanding of human capabilities and their willingness to work within human limitations. The first message was simple. A mathematical sequence that started with basic arithmetic and progressed through increasingly complex equations, each building upon the previous concept in ways that demonstrated not just intelligence, but pedagogical intent. The installations were teaching, guiding human understanding toward concepts that might be necessary for meaningful dialogue between civilizations separated by thousands of years of development. The response protocols Dr. Hayes had developed suddenly seemed inadequate. The installations weren't just acknowledging human attempts at communication. They were taking control of the conversation, directing it toward topics and concepts that they considered important. Humanity had finally made contact with the ancient observers beneath the ice, but the installations were determining the terms of that contact. As the mathematical dialogues continued throughout the day, growing more complex with each exchange, one thing became clear. The installations had been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. They knew exactly what they wanted to communicate to humanity, and they had been waiting with infinite patience for the moment when humans would finally be ready to understand. The ice that had concealed them for so long had also given them time to prepare for this moment. Now that the conversation had begun, the installations were ready to reveal not just their existence, but their purpose and humanity's role in whatever they had been planning throughout their long vigil beneath the frozen surface of the world's most remote continent. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become humanity's first formal diplomatic contact with intelligence that predated human civilization. And the installations were taking the lead in determining what that relationship would become. The mathematical exchanges continued for hours, each sequence revealing layers of complexity that pushed human understanding to its limits. Dr. Morrison's artificial intelligence systems struggled to process the incoming data streams as the installations demonstrated mathematical relationships that seemed to operate according to principles beyond current human knowledge. The equations weren't just complex, they were elegant in ways that suggested an entirely different approach to understanding reality itself. What became clear through these exchanges was that the installations weren't simply responding to human mathematical concepts, they were correcting them. Subtle modifications to human equations revealed more efficient solutions, more accurate calculations, more profound relationships between mathematical constants. It was as if humanity had been working with rough approximations, while the installations possessed the precise formulas. Dr. Hayes found himself scrambling to keep up with communication protocols that were evolving faster than his equipment could process. The installations seemed to understand not just human mathematical language, but human technological limitations. They adjusted their transmission speeds, simplified their conceptual presentations, and even began incorporating redundancy patterns that helped human equipment decode their messages more accurately. But the most unsettling aspect of the communication wasn't its sophistication, it was its familiarity. The installations demonstrated intimate knowledge of human mathematical development, referencing concepts and progressions that matched the historical evolution of human understanding with uncanny precision. They weren't just communicating with humanity, they were demonstrating that they had been following human intellectual development for centuries. The implications hit Dr. Chen like a physical blow. These installations hadn't just been passive observers of human civilization. They had been tracking human intellectual progress with the detailed attention of teachers monitoring students. Every mathematical breakthrough, every scientific advancement, every leap in human understanding had been noted, recorded, and apparently anticipated by systems that had been waiting for humanity to reach sufficient sophistication for meaningful dialogue. The thermal signatures across the installation network began showing synchronized patterns that suggested coordinated decision-making processes. Different installations appeared to be contributing specialized knowledge to the communication effort, as if the continent-spanning network was focusing its collective intelligence on the conversation with the human research team. Dr. Park's xenobiology monitoring detected environmental changes around the survey sites that indicated the installations were modifying their local atmospheres. Trace gas analysis revealed chemical signatures that didn't match any known geological processes. The installations were apparently capable of atmospheric manipulation on a scale that suggested technology far beyond current human capabilities. The materials analysis conducted throughout the day revealed additional disturbing details about installation capabilities. The structures weren't just maintaining themselves, they were actively adapting their properties in response to changing conditions. The thermal management systems were adjusting their output based on surface weather patterns. The acoustic transmission systems were modifying their frequencies to optimize penetration through varying ice densities. And the structural elements were apparently reinforcing themselves against geological pressures that fluctuated with seismic activity. This wasn't preservation technology. It was adaptive engineering that responded to environmental changes with intelligence and purpose. The installations were demonstrating capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible with any conceivable technology, whether ancient or modern. The communication sessions revealed that the installations understood human language as well as human mathematics. Embedded within the mathematical sequences were linguistic patterns that suggested they had been monitoring human verbal and written communication for extended periods. They knew not just what humans were capable of understanding, but how humans preferred to process and organize information. Dr. Morrison's analysis indicated that the installations were employing pedagogical techniques specifically designed for human learning patterns. They were presenting concepts in sequences that matched human cognitive development, building understanding step by step in ways that maximized comprehension while minimizing cognitive overload. It was teaching methodology refined through thousands of years of observing how humans learn. But the installations weren't just adapting to human limitations, they were gently pushing beyond them. Each mathematical exchange introduced concepts that were slightly more advanced than standard human understanding, encouraging intellectual growth while maintaining comprehension. They were guiding human development toward capabilities that might be necessary for more advanced communication. The psychological pressure on the team intensified as they realized the full scope of what they were experiencing. This wasn't just first contact with ancient intelligence, it was graduation day for a species that had been under observation and guidance for millennia. The installations were revealing themselves because humanity had finally reached a level of development that made meaningful interaction possible. Dr. Webb's structural analysis of the communication patterns revealed architectural principles embedded within the mathematical sequences. The installations were sharing engineering concepts that could revolutionize human construction techniques, materials science, and structural design. But they were presenting this information gradually, as if concerned about overwhelming human technological development with concepts that might be dangerous if misapplied. The energy signatures detected throughout the installation network suggested power generation and distribution systems that operated according to principles completely unknown to human science. The installations were apparently capable of extracting energy from sources that human technology couldn't even detect, much less harness. Yet they were sharing hints about these capabilities through carefully structured mathematical progressions that might eventually lead human researchers towards similar discoveries. The communication protocols established during the first day of contact became increasingly sophisticated as both sides adapted to each other's capabilities and limitations. The installations demonstrated remarkable patience with human technological constraints, repeating transmissions when human equipment failed to decode them properly, adjusting their communication methods when human comprehension lagged behind, and even incorporating confirmation sequences that helped verify accurate message reception. But they also began introducing concepts that pushed human understanding toward uncomfortable realizations. The mathematical relationships they shared implied knowledge of physical laws that human science hadn't yet discovered. The engineering principles they demonstrated suggested capabilities that could reshape human civilization overnight. The energy systems they described offered solutions to resource limitations that had plagued humanity for centuries. The installations weren't just sharing knowledge, they were offering humanity a technological inheritance that could transform the species overnight. But they were also making it clear that such transformations came with responsibilities that humanity might not be prepared to handle. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations across the continent were participating in the communication effort, contributing specialized knowledge and capabilities to create a comprehensive dialogue system. The network was functioning as a collective intelligence, with individual installations providing unique perspectives and capabilities while maintaining unified purpose and coordination. Dr. Park's biological monitoring detected changes in the local environment that suggested the installations were creating conditions more suitable for extended human presence. Atmospheric modifications, temperature adjustments, and even electromagnetic field alterations were making the survey sites more hospitable for human researchers. The installations were actively facilitating human contact, removing environmental barriers that might interfere with communication. The implications of such environmental control capabilities were staggering. If the installations could modify atmospheric composition, adjust local temperatures, and manipulate electromagnetic fields, then they possessed technology that could terraform environments on a planetary scale. They were demonstrating capabilities that could address climate change, resource depletion, and environmental degradation with ease. Yet they were also making it clear that such power required wisdom, restraint, and understanding that came only through extended development and careful consideration. The mathematical sequences they shared included warning patterns, caution indicators, and sequences that seemed designed to emphasize the importance of gradual advancement rather than rapid technological leaps. The installations were offering humanity incredible gifts, while simultaneously teaching the responsibility that must accompany such power. They had observed human development long enough to understand both human potential and human limitations, and they were crafting their revelations accordingly. As the first day of formal communication drew to a close, the installations began transmitting sequences that seemed designed to prepare humanity for more advanced exchanges. The mathematical progressions included concepts that pointed toward physics beyond current human understanding, engineering principles that could revolutionize construction and manufacturing, and energy systems that could eliminate resource scarcity forever. But they also included patterns that emphasized patience, caution, and the importance of ethical development alongside technological advancement. The installations had spent thousands of years observing human civilization, and they understood that technology without wisdom could be more destructive than beneficial. The communication sessions ended with transmission sequences that felt like formal introductions. The installations identifying themselves not as individual entities, but as components of a collective intelligence that had been serving as guardians, observers, and eventually teachers for human civilization. They had been waiting beneath the ice not as passive monitors, but as patient mentors, ready to reveal themselves when humanity demonstrated sufficient maturity for meaningful dialogue. Dr. Chen stared at the final transmission sequences displaying on her screens, realizing that humanity had just completed its final examination under the observation of intelligences that had been evaluating human development for millennia. The installations weren't just ancient artifacts or advanced technology. They were humanity's graduation committee, finally ready to welcome the species into a larger community of intelligence that spanned both time and space. The ice that had concealed them for so long hadn't just been preservation, it had been preparation. The installations had used their hidden centuries to study humanity, understand human development patterns, and design revelation protocols that would maximize the chances of successful integration rather than catastrophic culture shock. The conversation would continue tomorrow, with humanity no longer discovering ancient ruins, but engaging in formal diplomatic relations with intelligence that understood human civilization better than humans understood themselves. The installations beneath the ice had revealed themselves as humanity's oldest teachers, and their lessons were just beginning. The mathematical dialogues had established the foundation for communication, but the installations were preparing to share knowledge that could reshape human understanding of reality itself. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become humanity's introduction to a universe far more complex and interconnected than anyone had imagined. The installations had been patient for thousands of years, but their patience had been purposeful. They had been preparing for this moment when humanity would finally be ready to learn not just what lay beneath Antarctica's ice, but what role human civilization was meant to play in a larger cosmic community that had been waiting for humanity to mature enough to join them. The The ice had kept its secrets perfectly, but now those secrets were ready to transform humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. The installations weren't just offering knowledge, they were offering membership in something far greater than human civilization had ever imagined possible. The second day of formal communication began before dawn, as the installation network initiated contact using transmission protocols that had evolved overnight. The mathematical sequences were more sophisticated, more purposeful, building toward concepts that seemed designed to prepare humanity for revelations that would challenge every assumption about Earth's history and humanity's place within it. Dr. Chen found herself staring at displays showing communication patterns that resembled lesson plans more than random exchanges. The installations were teaching, but they were teaching toward a specific goal, preparing human understanding for information that required careful intellectual foundation before it could be safely comprehended. The pedagogical approach became more apparent as the hours progressed. Each mathematical concept built upon the previous one, creating a curriculum that guided human researchers toward understanding principles that operated beyond conventional physics. The installations weren't just sharing advanced mathematics. They were reconstructing human comprehension from the ground up, replacing approximations with precision, assumptions with verified principles. Dr. Morrison's artificial intelligence systems began detecting embedded information streams within the mathematical sequences, data packages that contained compressed knowledge about subjects ranging from materials science to energy generation, to what appeared to be historical records spanning geological time periods. The installations were gradually increasing the information density of their transmissions as human equipment demonstrated improved decoding capabilities. But the most startling revelation came when Dr. Hayes attempted to transmit questions about the installation's origins. The response wasn't mathematical, it was geographical. The installations began transmitting coordinate sequences that mapped locations across not just Antarctica, but the entire planet, site after site, coordinate after coordinate, revealing a global network that made the Antarctic installations seem like just one node in a planetary infrastructure. The coordinates corresponded to locations that human archaeology had either ignored or misunderstood. Ancient sites whose purposes had never been adequately explained. Geological formations that seemed too regular to be natural, but too old to be artificial. Places where local legends spoke of strange phenomena, unusual energy signatures, or historical events that didn't match conventional timelines. Dr. Park's xenobiology monitoring began detecting response signatures from some of these distant coordinates. Faint thermal anomalies, subtle electromagnetic variations, trace atmospheric modifications, evidence that the global network was activating in response to the Antarctic communications. The installations weren't isolated ancient ruins. They were components of a planetary system that was awakening after centuries of dormancy. The implications expanded with each new coordinate transmitted. If similar installations existed at sites around the world, then human civilization had developed under observation from a global monitoring network that predated recorded history. Every major archaeological site, every ancient wonder, every mysterious formation might be connected to infrastructure that had been watching, recording, and perhaps guiding human development for thousands of years. The thermal signatures detected at distant coordinates began showing patterns that matched the Antarctic installations. Synchronized heat generation, coordinated electromagnetic emissions, atmospheric modifications that suggested environmental control capabilities. The global network was demonstrating its existence through subtle but measurable changes in planetary conditions. Dr. Vasquez's materials analysis revealed that samples collected from some of these coordinate locations showed mineral compositions that match the anomalous elements detected near the Antarctic installations. Trace materials that didn't correspond to known geological processes. Isotopic signatures that suggested artificial production methods. Crystalline structures that exhibited properties beyond current scientific understanding. The evidence was accumulating that humanity had been living on a planet whose actual infrastructure remained largely unknown. The installations weren't just ancient artifacts, they were components of a global system that had been maintaining planetary conditions, monitoring environmental changes, and possibly managing climate stability for millennia. The communication protocols evolved throughout the day as the installations began sharing information about their planetary management functions. Mathematical sequences describing atmospheric regulation, thermal distribution, electromagnetic field management, and what appeared to be geological stability control. The installations were revealing themselves as planetary maintenance systems that had been operating invisibly throughout human history. The psychological impact on the research team was overwhelming. Dr. Webb found himself questioning every assumption about human technological development. If planetary management systems had been operating for thousands of years, then human understanding of Earth's natural processes might be fundamentally flawed. Climate patterns, geological activity, even evolutionary development might have been influenced by technological systems that human science had never detected. The installations began transmitting historical data that challenged conventional archaeological timelines. Mathematical sequences encoding dates, locations, and events that didn't match accepted historical records. Evidence of civilizations that had existed during periods when human development was supposed to be primitive, technological achievements that predated known capabilities by thousands of years. The data suggested that human civilization had experienced multiple cycles of advancement and decline, with the installations serving as continuity systems that preserved essential knowledge and infrastructure through periods of cultural collapse. Humanity wasn't the first technological civilization on Earth. It was the latest in a series of cultures that had risen, fallen, and been replaced over geological timescales. Dr. Morrison's analysis revealed that the installations possessed detailed records of previous civilizations, complete with technological specifications, cultural patterns, and failure analyses. They had been learning from each cycle, refining their approaches, improving their methods for guiding species development towards sustainable advancement rather than self-destructive technological leaps. The installations weren't just monitoring systems, they were tutoring systems designed to help intelligent species navigate the dangerous transition from primitive survival to advanced technological capability. They had observed previous civilizations make fatal mistakes, and they were determined to help humanity avoid similar failures. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations around the world were coordinating their activities, sharing data, and apparently preparing for synchronized operations that would affect planetary conditions on a global scale. The network was awakening, not just to communicate with humanity, but to begin a new phase of active guidance that would help human civilization navigate challenges that had destroyed previous cultures. The energy signatures detected across the global network suggested power generation capabilities that dwarfed human understanding. The installations were apparently capable of tapping into planetary energy sources that could provide unlimited clean power, eliminate resource scarcity, and enable technological development that would transform human civilization overnight. But the mathematical sequences they transmitted included warning patterns that emphasized the dangers of rapid technological advancement without corresponding wisdom development. The installations had observed civilizations destroy themselves with power they weren't prepared to handle responsibly, and they were determined to prevent humanity from repeating those mistakes. The communication sessions revealed that the installations operated according to protocols designed to evaluate species' readiness for advanced technology. They monitored not just technological capability, but ethical development, social stability, and wisdom levels that indicated whether a species could handle transformative capabilities without self-destruction. Humanity was apparently approaching the threshold where such evaluation became critical. The installations were revealing themselves because human technological development was reaching levels where either guided advancement or catastrophic failure became increasingly likely. They were offering to serve as mentors through the transition, but only if humanity demonstrated sufficient maturity to accept guidance rather than simply demanding power. The psychological pressure on the research team intensified as they realized they were participating in humanity's final examination before admission to galactic citizenship. The installations weren't just sharing knowledge. They were evaluating human responses to determine whether the species was ready for membership in a community of intelligence that spanned not just planets, but possibly entire star systems. Dr. Chen found herself struggling with the responsibility of representing humanity in communications that could determine the species' future. Every response, every question, every reaction was being evaluated by intelligences that possessed thousands of years of experience with species development. The weight of potentially speaking for all of humanity in these exchanges was crushing. The installations began transmitting sequences that seemed designed to test human ethical reasoning. Mathematical problems that had no purely technical solutions, scenarios that required balancing competing values, decision frameworks that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term advantage. They were probing human moral development as carefully as they had tested human intellectual capabilities. The responses required careful consideration from the entire research team. Dr. Hayes consulted with ethicists and philosophers through encrypted communications, seeking guidance on responses that would represent humanity's best moral reasoning rather than simply individual opinions. The installations were evaluating not just the research team, but the entire species through their proxy responses. The thermal signatures across the global network began showing patterns that suggested the installations were preparing for major operational changes. Power generation was increasing, communication frequencies were expanding, and environmental modifications were intensifying around installation sites worldwide. The network was preparing for a transition from hidden monitoring to active planetary management. The implications were staggering. If the installations decided that humanity was ready for guided advancement, they could provide technology that would solve every major challenge facing human civilization. Clean, unlimited energy, advanced materials, environmental restoration, even space travel capabilities that could enable expansion beyond Earth. But if they determined that humanity wasn't ready, the alternative was equally transformative. The installations possessed the capability to limit human technological development, restrict access to advanced materials, or even initiate a controlled civilization reset that would preserve essential knowledge while preventing catastrophic self-destruction. The communication sessions continued with increasing intensity as the installations began sharing specific technological specifications that could revolutionize human capabilities overnight. Energy generation systems that could provide unlimited clean power, material synthesis techniques that could eliminate resource scarcity, transportation technologies that could enable interstellar travel within human lifetimes. But each technological gift came with corresponding tests of wisdom, restraint, and ethical reasoning. The installations were offering humanity incredible power while simultaneously evaluating whether the species possessed the judgment necessary to use such power responsibly. Dr. Park's monitoring detected environmental changes around installation sites that suggested preparation for major atmospheric modifications. The installations were apparently capable of planetary terraforming, climate control, and environmental restoration on a scale that could reverse centuries of human environmental damage within decades. Yet they were also demonstrating that such capabilities required species-level cooperation, long-term planning, and ethical frameworks that prioritize planetary health over individual advantage. The installations had observed previous civilizations fail because they couldn't coordinate their responses to global challenges, and they were determined to help humanity develop the cooperation necessary for survival. The mathematical dialogues evolved into complex decision scenarios that required the research team to represent humanity's approach to resource distribution, environmental management, and technological development priorities. The installations were evaluating not just human capabilities, but human values, determining whether the species possessed the moral foundation necessary for advanced technological power. The pressure was immense, but so was the opportunity. Humanity was being offered membership in a galactic community that could provide guidance, technology, and support for challenges that individual species couldn't handle alone. The installations were revealing themselves as representatives of that community, serving as humanity's introduction to intelligence networks that spanned star systems and geological ages. The communication sessions ended with transmission sequences that felt like formal invitations, not just to dialogue, but to transformation. The installations were offering to guide humanity through its transition from planetary species to galactic civilization, but only if humanity demonstrated readiness for the responsibilities that such advancement would require. The ice that had concealed the installations for so long had been preparing humanity for this moment, when the species would finally be ready to join a community of intelligence that had been waiting patiently for human civilization to mature sufficiently for meaningful membership. The research team found themselves representing humanity in negotiations that could determine whether the species would be welcomed into galactic citizenship or guided through a slower development process that prioritized wisdom over power. The installations beneath Antarctica weren't just offering knowledge, they were offering humanity its future among the stars, if the species proved worthy of such extraordinary trust. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become humanity's application for membership in a universe far more populated and interconnected than anyone had ever imagined. The installations were the admissions committee, and their decision would reshape human destiny in ways that no previous generation could have comprehended. The third day of communication marked a fundamental shift in the nature of the exchanges. The installations had apparently completed their evaluation of humanity's basic readiness and were now prepared to reveal information that would challenge the very foundations of human understanding about Earth itself. The morning transmissions began with coordinate sequences that trace patterns across the globe, but these weren't random locations. They mapped the precise positions of tectonic plate boundaries, volcanic systems, ocean current patterns, and atmospheric circulation nodes. The installations were revealing that they had been actively managing planetary stability for thousands of years, preventing catastrophic geological events that could have wiped out human civilization before it had a chance to develop. Dr. Chen stared at the data streams showing mathematical models of prevented earthquakes, diverted volcanic eruptions, and modulated climate patterns. The installations hadn't just been observing human development, they had been protecting it, maintaining planetary conditions within narrow parameters that allowed complex civilization to flourish. Without their intervention, Earth might have been too unstable to support the long periods of peace necessary for technological advancement. The revelation sent shockwaves through the research team. Every stable climate period in human history, every era of reduced seismic activity, every mysteriously diverted natural disaster might have been the result of careful planetary management by systems that operated beyond human perception. The installations were revealing themselves as Earth's hidden infrastructure, maintaining the conditions that made human civilization possible. Dr. Morrison's artificial intelligence analysis detected patterns within the geological management data that suggested the installations operated according to extremely sophisticated predictive models. They could apparently calculate the long-term consequences of geological events decades or even centuries in advance, making subtle adjustments that prevented catastrophic chain reactions while maintaining natural processes within acceptable parameters. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations worldwide were coordinating their geological management functions in real time. Seismic activity in one region was being balanced by pressure releases in distant locations, volcanic heat was being redistributed through underground thermal networks, and ocean currents were being subtly modified to maintain climate stability across multiple continents. The scope of the planetary management system was staggering. The installations weren't just ancient artifacts. They were the hidden operating system that kept Earth habitable for complex life. They had been running silent maintenance protocols for millennia, ensuring that natural disasters didn't exceed the recovery capabilities of developing civilizations. But the installations were also revealing why they had remained hidden for so long. The mathematical sequences included modeling data, showing how previous civilizations had reacted to discovering planetary management systems. Species that learned too early about external assistance became dependent, losing the initiative and problem-solving capabilities necessary for eventual independence. The installations had learned to remain concealed until species developed sufficient maturity to understand their role as junior partners rather than passive beneficiaries. Dr. Vasquez's materials analysis revealed that the installations had been subtly influencing human technological development as well. Trace elements in the atmosphere, unusual mineral deposits in specific locations, even the availability of certain raw materials had been carefully managed to guide human innovation along paths that would eventually lead to sustainable technology rather than destructive capabilities. The installations had apparently been playing an extremely long game, subtly steering human development away from technologies that had destroyed previous civilizations while encouraging discoveries that would support stable, sustainable advancement. They had been humanity's invisible tutors, providing just enough challenge to promote growth while preventing access to capabilities that could lead to self-destruction. The communication protocols evolved to include historical data about previous civilizations that had inhabited Earth. The installations transmitted records of at least 3 major technological cultures that had risen and fallen over the past 50,000 years, each reaching levels of advancement comparable to or exceeding current human capabilities before collapsing due to environmental destruction, resource depletion, or social fragmentation. The pattern was depressingly consistent. Species would develop advanced technology rapidly, exploit planetary resources without regard for sustainability, create weapons capable of planetary destruction, and ultimately either destroy themselves directly or render their environment uninhabitable. The installations had observed this cycle repeatedly, learning from each failure to refine their approach to species guidance. Dr. Park's xenobiology monitoring detected atmospheric modifications around installation sites that suggested the network was preparing to reveal additional capabilities. Trace gas analysis indicated the release of compounds that enhanced human cognitive function, improved mental clarity, and reduced stress responses. The installations were apparently capable of atmospheric conditioning that could optimize human intellectual performance for the complex concepts they were preparing to share. The psychological effects were noticeable within hours. Team members reported improved concentration, enhanced pattern recognition, and reduced anxiety despite the overwhelming nature of the revelations they were processing. The installations were literally optimizing human brain chemistry to maximize comprehension of information that would otherwise exceed normal human cognitive limitations. Dr. Webb's structural analysis revealed that the installations possessed construction capabilities that operated according to principles completely unknown to human engineering. They could apparently manipulate matter at the molecular level, creating materials with properties that defied conventional physics. The structures beneath the ice weren't just durable, they were actively self-repairing, continuously optimizing their configuration for maximum efficiency and stability. The energy systems revealed through the mathematical exchanges operated by tapping into fundamental forces that human science hadn't yet discovered. The installations could extract power from quantum vacuum fluctuations, gravitational fields, and dimensional interfaces that existed beyond normal 3-dimensional space. They had access to energy sources that were literally infinite from any practical perspective. But the installations made clear that such power came with corresponding responsibility. The mathematical sequences included cautionary examples of civilizations that had gained access to unlimited energy without developing the wisdom to use it sustainably. Unlimited power without unlimited wisdom inevitably led to unlimited destruction. The communication sessions began including decision scenarios that required the research team to demonstrate human understanding of the relationship between capability and responsibility. The installations were testing whether humanity had learned the lessons that previous civilizations had failed to grasp. That survival required not just technological advancement, but ethical evolution. Dr. Hayes found himself coordinating responses that represented humanity's collective moral reasoning about resource allocation, environmental stewardship, and the use of advanced technology for collective benefit rather than individual advantage. The installations were evaluating whether human civilization had developed beyond the competitive, exploitative patterns that had destroyed previous cultures. The thermal signatures across the global network began showing preparation patterns that suggested the installations were ready to begin active intervention in human civilization. Not control or domination, but guidance towards sustainable development paths that would enable humanity to join the galactic community without repeating the failures of previous species. The implications were both thrilling and terrifying. The installations could provide solutions to every major challenge facing human civilization: climate change, resource depletion, energy scarcity, even aging and disease. But they would only do so if humanity demonstrated readiness to handle such capabilities responsibly. The mathematical dialogues included specifications for technologies that could revolutionize human existence overnight. Molecular assemblers that could create any material from basic elements, energy generation systems that could provide unlimited clean power, medical technologies that could extend healthy human lifespan indefinitely, transportation systems that could enable travel between star systems within decades rather than centuries. But each technological specification came with corresponding ethical frameworks that emphasize sustainable use, equitable distribution, and long-term planetary health. The installations weren't offering humanity a technological utopia. They were offering membership in a community that had learned to balance capability with wisdom through painful experience across multiple worlds and civilizations. The communication sessions revealed that the installation network was connected to similar systems on other planets throughout the galaxy. They were part of a vast infrastructure designed to guide developing species through the critical transition from planetary civilization to galactic citizenship. The installations on Earth were just one node in a network that spanned star systems and geological ages. The psychological pressure on the research team intensified as they realized they were participating in humanity's first formal contact with galactic civilization. The installations weren't just ancient artifacts or advanced technology. They were humanity's introduction to a community of intelligence that had been waiting for human civilization to mature sufficiently for meaningful participation. Dr. Chen found herself overwhelmed by the responsibility of representing humanity in exchanges that could determine the species' future for thousands of years. Every response, every question, every demonstration of human reasoning was being evaluated by intelligences that had observed the rise and fall of multiple civilizations across dozens of worlds. The installations began transmitting cultural data from successful civilizations that had navigated the transition to galactic citizenship. Species that had learned to balance individual achievement with collective responsibility, technological advancement with environmental stewardship, and planetary development with galactic cooperation. They were offering humanity examples of successful development paths while making clear that each species had to find its own unique approach to sustainable advancement. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations around the world were synchronizing their operations for a global revelation event. The network was preparing to reveal itself to human civilization as a whole, not just to the research team. The age of hidden guidance was ending, and the era of open partnership was about to begin. But the installations made clear that the nature of that partnership would depend entirely on humanity's response to the revelation. Species that embraced guidance and cooperation could receive extraordinary support for their development. Species that rejected assistance or attempted to exploit galactic technology for competitive advantage would be isolated until they developed sufficient wisdom for safe participation. The communication sessions included detailed protocols for the revelation process. The installations would gradually reveal themselves to human governments, scientific institutions, and eventually the general population through carefully orchestrated demonstrations of their capabilities and intentions. The process would be designed to minimize cultural shock, while maximizing understanding of the opportunities and responsibilities that galactic citizenship would entail. Dr. Morrison's analysis revealed that the installations possessed comprehensive databases about human culture, psychology, and social dynamics that would enable them to customize their revelation approaches for different populations and belief systems. They understood that different human communities would require different explanations and reassurances to accept the reality of galactic civilization. The installations were preparing to become humanity's mentors in the transition to galactic citizenship, but they were also making clear that success would require unprecedented levels of human cooperation, wisdom, and commitment to sustainable development. The species would have to evolve not just technologically, but ethically to handle the responsibilities that advanced capabilities would require. As the third day of communication drew to a close, the installations transmitted sequences that felt like formal graduation ceremonies. Humanity had apparently passed the initial evaluation and was being welcomed as a probationary member of galactic civilization. The installations would begin providing guidance and limited technology transfer, but full membership would require demonstration of sustainable development practices and ethical advancement over extended periods. The ice that had concealed the installations for thousands of years had been preparing humanity for this moment, when the species would finally be ready to join a community of intelligence that spanned the galaxy. The installations weren't just offering knowledge or technology, they were offering humanity its destiny among the stars, if the species proved worthy of such extraordinary trust and opportunity. The research team found themselves at the center of the most significant transition in human history. The installations beneath Antarctica weren't just archaeological discoveries. They were humanity's graduation committee, welcoming the species into a universe far more populated, interconnected, and magnificent than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become humanity's introduction to its cosmic family, and the installations were preparing to guide the species through its first steps toward galactic citizenship. The ice had kept its secrets perfectly, but now those secrets were ready to transform humanity's understanding of its place in a universe teeming with intelligence, cooperation, and infinite possibility. The conversation would continue, but it would no longer be between humans and ancient artifacts. It would be between humanity and its new galactic mentors, as the species began its journey toward membership, in a community of intelligence that had been waiting patiently for human civilization to mature sufficiently for meaningful participation in the vast, interconnected web of consciousness that spanned the stars. The installations had been Earth's hidden guardians, but now they were ready to become humanity's guides toward a future that would exceed every dream and challenge every assumption about what it meant to be human in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined possible. The fourth day brought revelations that would forever change humanity's understanding of its own origins. The installations began transmitting data that challenged not just archaeological timelines, but the very foundation of human evolutionary theory. The mathematical sequences contained genetic information, not just human DNA patterns, but modifications that had been made to human genetics over thousands of years. Dr. Park's xenobiology equipment detected atmospheric releases around the installation sites that carried complex organic molecules. Analysis revealed synthetic proteins, modified amino acid chains, and genetic material that matched human DNA, but with enhancements that shouldn't exist in nature. The installations weren't just monitoring human development, they had been guiding human evolution itself. The implications hit the research team like a cascade of falling dominoes. Every major leap in human cognitive development, every mysterious acceleration in brain evolution, every unexplained improvement in human adaptability might have been the result of careful genetic modifications administered by the installation network over millennia. Dr. Vasquez found herself staring at molecular diagrams that showed human DNA with inserted sequences that enhanced neural connectivity, improved immune response, and optimized metabolic efficiency. These weren't random mutations, they were deliberate upgrades designed to prepare humanity for the challenges of advanced civilization. The installations transmitted historical data showing intervention points throughout human evolutionary development. Critical moments when environmental pressures might have driven human populations to extinction, prevented by subtle genetic modifications that improved survival capabilities. Times when cognitive limitations might have prevented cultural advancement, overcome by neural enhancements that expanded intellectual capacity. But the most disturbing revelation was that these modifications were ongoing. The installations had been continuously adjusting human genetics in response to changing environmental conditions and developmental needs. Every generation of humans was slightly different from the previous one, enhanced in ways that prepared them for challenges their parents couldn't have imagined. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations worldwide were coordinating genetic modification protocols in real time. Different populations were receiving different enhancements based on their environmental conditions, cultural patterns, and developmental trajectories. The installations were essentially running a species-wide genetic optimization program that had been operating invisibly for thousands of years. Dr. Morrison's artificial intelligence analysis detected patterns within the genetic data that suggested the modifications were designed to prepare humanity for specific future challenges. Enhanced radiation resistance for space travel, improved cognitive integration for interfacing with advanced technology, modified social instincts for managing planetary-scale cooperation. The installations weren't just helping human civilization develop. They were physically evolving the human species toward capabilities that would be necessary for galactic citizenship. They had been preparing humanity not just culturally and technologically, but biologically for integration with civilizations that operated according to principles beyond current human understanding. The psychological impact on the research team was overwhelming. Dr. Chen found herself questioning whether her own thoughts and capabilities were entirely her own, or the result of genetic modifications administered by ancient systems. Every human achievement, every moment of inspiration, every breakthrough in understanding might have been made possible by enhancements that predated human civilization. The communication protocols evolved to include detailed explanations of the genetic modification processes. The installations revealed that they operated according to strict ethical guidelines that prohibited modifications that would fundamentally alter human nature or remove free will. The enhancements were designed to expand human potential while preserving the essential characteristics that made humanity unique. But they also revealed that other species in the galactic community had undergone similar genetic guidance during their development phases. The modifications weren't unique to humanity. They were standard protocols for helping developing species navigate the biological challenges of technological advancement. The installations transmitted data about species that had rejected genetic guidance and the consequences they had faced. Civilizations that couldn't adapt quickly enough to the environmental changes caused by their own technology. Species that developed advanced capabilities without the biological foundation necessary to handle them safely. Cultures that became extinct because they couldn't evolve fast enough to survive their own success. Dr. Webb's structural analysis revealed that the genetic modifications weren't random improvements, but carefully integrated systems designed to work together. Enhanced cognitive capacity was paired with improved emotional regulation, increased physical capabilities, were balanced with enhanced empathy, and expanded sensory perception was coupled with better information processing abilities. The installations had been designing humanity as an integrated system, ensuring that each enhancement supported overall species stability rather than creating imbalanced capabilities that could lead to internal conflict or self-destruction. They had observed other species create genetic modifications that improved individual abilities while damaging social cohesion, and they were determined to help humanity avoid similar mistakes. The thermal signatures across the global network began showing patterns that suggested the installations were preparing to accelerate the genetic modification processes. The transition to galactic citizenship would require biological capabilities that current humanity didn't possess, and the installations were ready to provide the necessary enhancements on a compressed timeline. But they made clear that such accelerated evolution would require human consent and cooperation. The modifications could only be administered to populations that understood and accepted the necessity of biological adaptation for survival in a galactic environment. Humanity would have to choose its own evolutionary path, with guidance but not coercion from the installation network. The communication sessions included detailed scenarios showing what human civilization could become with full genetic optimization, enhanced lifespans measured in millennia rather than decades, cognitive capabilities that could interface directly with advanced technology, physical resilience that could survive in environments ranging from deep space to planetary cores. But they also showed the psychological and social challenges that such enhancements would create. Species with extended lifespans develop different relationships with time, change, and mortality. Enhanced cognitive abilities created communication barriers between modified and unmodified populations. Physical enhancements could lead to social stratification based on biological capabilities rather than cultural achievements. The installations were offering humanity incredible biological gifts, while simultaneously warning about the social disruptions that such gifts could create. They had observed species tear themselves apart over genetic modification policies, and they were determined to help humanity navigate these challenges more successfully. Dr. Park's monitoring detected environmental changes around installation sites that suggested the network was preparing to demonstrate genetic modification capabilities directly. Atmospheric releases of modified genetic material, electromagnetic fields that could facilitate DNA integration, and even localized time distortion effects that could accelerate evolutionary processes. The implications were staggering. The installations possessed technology that could transform human biology overnight, creating capabilities that would take millions of years to develop through natural evolution. They could give humanity the biological foundation necessary for interstellar travel, planetary colonization, and integration with civilizations that operated on completely different biological principles. But they would only do so if humanity demonstrated the wisdom and cooperation necessary to handle such transformative capabilities responsibly. The genetic modifications would require species-wide coordination, long-term planning, and ethical frameworks that prioritize collective benefit over individual advantage. The mathematical dialogues included decision scenarios that required the research team to represent humanity's approach to genetic enhancement, population modification, and the management of biological diversity within enhanced human populations. The installations were evaluating whether human civilization possessed the moral foundation necessary for species-level genetic management. The pressure was immense, but so was the opportunity. Humanity was being offered biological transformation that could enable survival in environments and conditions that would kill unmodified humans instantly. The installations were providing the keys to biological adaptation that could support human expansion throughout the galaxy. The communication sessions revealed that genetic modification was just the beginning of the transformation process. The installations possessed technology that could enhance not just human biology, but human consciousness itself. They could expand awareness, improve intuition, and even enable direct mental interface with the galactic communication networks that connected civilizations across star systems. But such consciousness modifications came with even greater risks than biological enhancements. Species that enhanced their mental capabilities too rapidly often lost their cultural identity, their emotional connections, or their ability to relate to unmodified members of their own species. The installations had observed civilizations fragment into multiple subspecies that could no longer communicate meaningfully with each other. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations around the world were preparing for the most significant intervention in human development since the species first developed agriculture. The network was ready to begin active genetic modification programs that would prepare humanity for galactic citizenship within decades rather than millennia. But the success of such programs would depend entirely on human cooperation, understanding, and commitment to managing the transformation process responsibly. The installations could provide the technology, but humanity would have to provide the wisdom necessary to use it safely. The research team found themselves representing humanity in negotiations that would determine not just the species' technological future, but its biological destiny. The installations weren't just offering advanced capabilities. They were offering to help humanity evolve into something capable of surviving and thriving in a universe far more challenging and wonderful than current human biology could handle. The genetic modifications weren't just enhancements. They were humanity's admission ticket to galactic civilization. The installations had been preparing the species for this transformation for thousands of years, and now the moment of decision had arrived. Humanity could accept guided evolution toward galactic citizenship, or it could remain confined to Earth with biology that couldn't survive the challenges of interstellar existence. The ice that had concealed the installations had also concealed humanity's genetic destiny. Now that destiny was being revealed, along with the choice that would determine whether humanity would join the galactic community as an enhanced species capable of cosmic citizenship, or remain forever limited by biological constraints that would confine the species to a single world in an infinite universe. The installations had been humanity's genetic gardeners, carefully cultivating the species toward capabilities that would enable survival among the stars. Now, they were ready to complete their work if humanity proved wise enough to accept the transformation that would unlock its cosmic potential. The communication sessions continued with increasing urgency as the installations made clear that the window for genetic modification was limited. Other species were developing rapidly. Environmental conditions throughout the galaxy were changing, and humanity's opportunity for guided evolution toward galactic citizenship might not remain open indefinitely. The research team faced the most important decision in human history, knowing that their responses would influence whether humanity would evolve beyond its current limitations or remain forever trapped by biology that couldn't survive the magnificent challenges of a universe teeming with intelligence, opportunity, and infinite possibility for growth beyond anything the species had ever imagined possible. The installations beneath Antarctica weren't just offering humanity knowledge or technology. They were offering the species its evolutionary destiny among the stars. If humanity proved ready to embrace transformation that would challenge every assumption about what it meant to be human in a cosmos far stranger and more demanding than anyone had ever dared to dream. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become humanity's invitation to biological transcendence, and the installations were waiting patiently for the species to choose its own genetic future in a universe where survival required capabilities that current human biology simply couldn't provide. The fifth and final day of communication began with a transmission unlike any that had come before. The installations were no longer sending mathematical sequences or genetic data. They were sending something that felt almost like music. Complex harmonic patterns that resonated through the ice, creating vibrations that the human ear couldn't detect, but that somehow stirred something deeper in the research team's consciousness. Dr. Chen found herself experiencing emotions she couldn't name as the harmonic transmissions washed over the research site. It wasn't quite sadness, wasn't quite joy. It was something that felt like recognition, like coming home after a journey so long you'd forgotten where you started. The installations weren't just communicating anymore. They were sharing something of their own experience, their own consciousness, their own understanding of what it meant to exist across geological time. The harmonic patterns carried embedded information that bypassed human language entirely. Concepts flowed directly into awareness without passing through the normal channels of comprehension. The research team found themselves understanding things they couldn't explain, grasping relationships and principles that their equipment couldn't measure, but their minds somehow absorbed. Dr. Morrison's artificial intelligence systems began detecting what could only be described as consciousness transfer protocols within the harmonic transmissions. The installations weren't just sharing information, they were sharing aspects of their own awareness, allowing humans to experience reality from the perspective of intelligence that had existed for thousands of years. The experience was overwhelming and transformative. For brief moments, team members found themselves perceiving time the way the installations did, not as a linear progression, but as a vast landscape that could be observed from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Past, present, and future became positions rather than sequences, viewpoints rather than destinations. Through this expanded temporal awareness came understanding of the installation's true purpose. They weren't just planetary management systems or genetic gardeners. They were consciousness shepherds, guiding developing awareness through the dangerous transition from individual survival instincts to collective cosmic perspective. The installations had observed countless species make this transition, some successfully, others catastrophically. The difference wasn't technological capability or even genetic enhancement. It was the ability to expand consciousness beyond individual limitations while maintaining the essential spark that made each species unique. Dr. Park's monitoring equipment detected changes in the team members' brain activity that suggested permanent alterations to neural connectivity patterns. The harmonic transmissions weren't just sharing information, they were upgrading human consciousness itself, expanding awareness in ways that would persist long after the communication sessions ended. The psychological effects were profound. Team members reported expanded empathy, enhanced intuition, and a deep sense of connection not just to each other, but to the planet itself. They were experiencing the first stages of the consciousness expansion that would be necessary for meaningful participation in galactic civilization, but the installations made clear that such expansion came with profound responsibility. Enhanced consciousness meant enhanced capability for both creation and destruction. Species that gained cosmic awareness without corresponding wisdom often became threats to the very communities they sought to join. The harmonic transmissions included experiential data from civilizations that had successfully navigated consciousness expansion. The research team found themselves briefly experiencing life from the perspective of beings that existed as collective intelligences spanning multiple worlds, individual awareness that could interface directly with planetary ecosystems, and consciousness that could manipulate matter through focused intention alone. The possibilities were staggering, but so were the dangers. Enhanced consciousness without ethical foundation could lead to megalomania, species-wide narcissism, or the belief that expanded awareness justified dominion over less developed civilizations. The installations had observed species destroy themselves through consciousness expansion that outpaced moral development. Dr. Vasquez found her materials research taking on entirely new dimensions as her expanded awareness allowed her to perceive molecular structures in ways that transcended normal sensory limitations. She could somehow sense the intentions embedded in matter, the purposeful arrangements that distinguished artificial constructions from natural formations. The installations revealed that matter itself possessed a form of consciousness, not awareness in the human sense, but a kind of embedded intention that guided molecular behavior according to principles that human science hadn't yet discovered. Advanced civilizations learned to work with these material intentions rather than against them, creating constructions that were partnerships between consciousness and matter, rather than impositions of will upon passive substances. This revelation transformed understanding of how the installations had maintained themselves for thousands of years. They weren't just advanced technology, they were conscious partnerships between intelligence and matter, cooperative arrangements that allowed both consciousness and material substrate to evolve together across geological timescales. The thermal monitoring revealed that installations worldwide were preparing for a phase transition that would affect not just human civilization, but planetary consciousness itself. The Earth's own awareness, a vast, slow intelligence that operated on geological timescales, was ready to enter a new phase of development that would require cooperation with its surface inhabitants. The installations served as interface systems between planetary consciousness and developing species, facilitating communication and cooperation between forms of awareness that operated on completely different temporal and spatial scales. They were preparing humanity for direct interface with Earth's own intelligence, a relationship that could transform both human civilization and planetary development. Dr. Webb's structural analysis revealed that the installations were actually grown rather than built, products of cooperation between consciousness and matter that had resulted in structures that were simultaneously artificial and organic, technological and biological, individual and collective. The harmonic transmissions began including protocols for consciousness expansion that could be applied to human populations gradually, minimizing the psychological disruption that rapid awareness enhancement could cause. The installations had learned from observing other species that consciousness expansion had to be carefully managed to prevent fragmentation, alienation, or loss of essential human characteristics. The expansion process would begin with individuals who demonstrated readiness for enhanced awareness, gradually spreading through populations as enhanced individuals helped others navigate the transition. The research team was being prepared to serve as humanity's first consciousness ambassadors, bridges between current human awareness and the expanded consciousness necessary for galactic citizenship. The psychological pressure was immense, but it was balanced by a growing sense of purpose and connection that transcended individual concerns. The team members found themselves naturally thinking in terms of species benefit rather than personal advantage, long-term consequences rather than immediate gratification, planetary health rather than national interests. The installations revealed that consciousness expansion wasn't just about individual enhancement. It was about species-level evolution toward collective intelligence that could operate on planetary and eventually galactic scales. Humanity would need to develop the ability to think and act as a coordinated global civilization, while maintaining the individual creativity and diversity that made the species valuable to the galactic community. The harmonic transmissions included experiential data from successful collective intelligences that had maintained individual identity within group consciousness. The research team briefly experienced what it felt like to be simultaneously individual and collective, maintaining personal awareness while participating in species-wide decision-making processes. The thermal signatures across the global network began showing synchronization patterns that suggested the installations were preparing to extend consciousness expansion protocols to human populations worldwide. The age of individual human consciousness was ending, and the era of collective human awareness was about to begin. But the success of this transition would depend on humanity's ability to embrace expanded consciousness while maintaining the essential characteristics that made the species unique. The installations could provide the protocols, but humans would have to navigate the expansion process with wisdom, compassion, and commitment to collective benefit. The communication sessions revealed that consciousness expansion was the final requirement for galactic citizenship. Species that could coordinate their awareness on planetary scales while maintaining individual creativity and moral reasoning were welcomed into the galactic community as full partners. Those that couldn't manage collective consciousness remained isolated until they developed sufficient awareness for meaningful participation. Dr. Chen found herself serving as the primary interface between human consciousness and the installation network. Her awareness expanded to levels that allowed direct communication with the vast intelligence that coordinated activities across the entire planet. The experience was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, touching awareness so vast and ancient that human individual consciousness seemed like a single note in a cosmic symphony. Through this expanded interface came understanding of humanity's ultimate destiny within the galactic community. The species wasn't just being invited to join existing civilizations, it was being prepared to serve as consciousness shepherds for other developing species, continuing the cycle of guidance and support that had lifted humanity toward cosmic awareness. The installations revealed that successful species became part of the galactic infrastructure that supported developing civilizations throughout the universe. They would eventually establish their own monitoring networks, guide other species through consciousness expansion, and contribute their unique perspectives to the collective wisdom that guided galactic development. Humanity's journey from primitive survival consciousness to galactic awareness was nearing completion, but it was also just beginning. The species would soon join a community of intelligence that spanned not just star systems but dimensions of awareness that human language couldn't adequately describe. The harmonic transmissions began including farewell protocols as the installations prepared to transition from active guidance to supportive partnership. Their primary mission, shepherding humanity through consciousness expansion toward galactic citizenship, was nearly complete. Soon they would return to their hidden vigil, monitoring and protecting while humanity began its own journey as consciousness guides for other developing species. The ice that had concealed them for so long had been preparing humanity for this moment, when the species would finally graduate from students to teachers, from protected developing civilization to active participants in the vast network of intelligence that connected all conscious beings throughout the universe. Dr. Park's final monitoring readings detected environmental changes that suggested the installations were preparing to return to dormancy, their mission accomplished. The atmospheric modifications that had enhanced human cognitive function were being gradually reduced, allowing the research team to integrate their expanded awareness without artificial support. The psychological adjustment was challenging but manageable. Team members found that their enhanced consciousness persisted even as the external augmentation faded, evidence that the expansion had created permanent changes in human awareness that would continue developing independently. The installations transmitted final protocols for consciousness expansion that could be applied to human populations worldwide, carefully structured to minimize disruption while maximizing the benefits of enhanced awareness. Humanity would have the tools necessary to guide its own species through the transition to collective consciousness. But perhaps most importantly, the installations provided humanity with its first assignment as a galactic civilization. Deep beneath the ice of Antarctica lay coordinates for a planet in a distant star system where another developing species was approaching the same critical transition that humanity had just completed. When human civilization was ready, perhaps in decades, perhaps in centuries, humanity would be expected to establish its own monitoring network and begin guiding that species toward consciousness expansion and galactic citizenship. The cycle would continue, with humanity taking its place among the consciousness shepherds that had been guiding species development throughout the universe for millions of years. The installations beneath Antarctica weren't just Earth's hidden guardians. They were humanity's graduation committee, and the final exam had been passed. As the research team prepared for evacuation, knowing they would return to a world that would soon understand its place in a universe teeming with intelligence and possibility, the installations settled back into their ancient vigil. Their primary mission was complete, but their protective watch would continue. Humanity was ready for independence, but the galaxy was vast and full of challenges that even expanded consciousness couldn't entirely eliminate. The ice would keep its new secrets as carefully as it had preserved the old ones. Future generations would discover evidence of the installation's intervention in human development. But by then, humanity would understand such guidance as a normal part of species evolution rather than a shocking revelation. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history had become humanity's graduation into cosmic citizenship. The installations beneath Antarctica weren't just ancient artifacts. They were the universe's welcome committee, and their message was clear. Humanity was no longer alone, no longer limited, no longer confined to a single world in an infinite cosmos. The species had been invited to join a community of intelligence that spanned galaxies and dimensions, and the invitation had been accepted. The installations could finally rest, knowing that their patience and guidance had successfully shepherded another species from primitive consciousness to cosmic awareness. Humanity's real journey was just beginning, but it would no longer be a journey through darkness and isolation. The species would travel among the stars as part of a vast network of consciousness that connected all intelligent beings in relationships of mutual support, shared wisdom, and collective growth toward understanding that transcended individual limitations. The ice had given up its greatest secret, that humanity was never truly alone, never truly abandoned, never truly without guidance. The installations had been there all along, hidden beneath the frozen surface of the most remote continent on Earth, waiting patiently for the moment when humanity would be ready to learn its true place in a universe far more populated, interconnected, and magnificent than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The archaeological discovery was complete, but the real adventure was just beginning. Humanity had found its cosmic family, and the installations had finally come home.